Brianna sat at the corner of the dark, dingy bar, swirling her drink absent-mindedly. She hadn't planned on drinking tonight, but the message she found on her husband's phone replayed over and over in her head. Her best friend Jessica, the woman she had trusted for years, was the other woman. Their affair was not recent either. It had been going on for months, maybe even years. The taste of betrayal was bitterer than the alcohol she swallowed. Her hand trembled slightly as she sipped her whiskey, the cold liquid burning its way down her throat. The pain gnawing at her heart felt endless, sharp, and jagged. She could barely breathe, like the weight of her emotions was pushing down on her chest. She had always known she wasn't beautiful. Growing up, she was teased for her weight, called names that stuck with her even into adulthood. When she met Ryan, she thought she had found the one man who saw past her appearance. He had promised her the world, whispered words of love and loyalty. But those were lies, empty promises that shattered in the face of infidelity. The evening sun was setting, casting a dull, reddish hue across the room. It reminded her of how her life had faded from vibrant to dull in the blink of an eye. She could hear the faint laughter of people around her, but it all seemed so distant, as if she was trapped in a bubble of her own misery. Everything felt surreal. How could they do this to me, she thought. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just Ryan. It was Jessica too. Jessica, the one she confided in, the one she shared her fears with. Her best friend had stabbed her in the back. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. She glanced at the screen. It was Ryan. His name flashed repeatedly as he tried to call, but she let it ring. What could he say that would make any of this better? His voice, once comforting, now felt like poison in her ears. She pushed her drink away, feeling her stomach churn. Alcohol wasn't the answer. She knew that, but for a brief moment, it dulled the ache, numbed the suffocating pain. Tonight, everything was falling apart, and she didn't know how to pick up the pieces. Hours later, Brianna found herself stumbling out of the bar, the city lights blurring in front of her. The alcohol had taken its toll, and her mind was foggy, emotions raw. She stepped into the street without looking, the sounds of the city distant and muffled. A sudden screech of tires was the only warning she had before she felt the impact. Pain exploded across her body as she was thrown to the ground. She didn't even have time to scream before everything went black. When she woke up, the white lights of the hospital ceiling blinded her. Her body felt like it had been run over by a freight train, bruises, cuts, and a sharp pain radiating from her ribs. She could barely move, the weight of her own body pressing her into the hospital bed. She wasn't dead. That was the first thought that crossed her mind. But a part of her wished she had been. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. Ryan wasn't there when she woke. Of course he wasn't. Why would he be? He was probably with Jessica. The thought made her stomach twist with nausea. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she was too exhausted to wipe it away. Brianna lay there for what felt like hours, her mind drifting in and out of consciousness. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals, but they were just faceless people, ghosts in her haze of pain and misery. No one stayed long enough to talk, to ask her if she was okay, if she needed something more than just physical healing. In that lonely hospital bed, something inside her shifted. The thought of her life continuing like this, broken, betrayed, and forgotten, was unbearable. She couldn't go back to the way things were, not after what had happened. But what could she do? The answer came to her slowly, like a whisper at the back of her mind. She needed to change. Not just her situation, not just her life, herself. The old Brianna, the one who had been humiliated and rejected, would have to die. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts crystallizing into a cold, hard resolve. She would become someone new, someone beautiful, someone who could make Ryan and Jessica regret every single moment they had looked down on her. She didn't just want to recover, she wanted revenge. The doctors said it would take months for her body to fully heal from the accident. But that was fine. Brianna had time. She had a plan. And when she was ready, the world would see a different woman, a woman who no longer cared about love or friendship, only vengeance. With a new name, a new face, and a new life, she would return, and she would make them all pay. The weeks following the accident were the longest and most painful of Brianna's life. Each day, she lay in the hospital bed, her body battered and broken. forcing herself to endure the physical pain as a way to numb the far deeper emotional wounds she carried. Her reflection in the mirror was as distorted as the life she now led. Bruises and bandages hid her face, but even they couldn't mask the reality beneath. She was unrecognizable, not just to the world, but to herself. The betrayal that had led her here was like a poison, infecting every thought she had. She replayed it endlessly. The messages she found, the quiet smirks Jessica probably gave her behind her back, Ryan's deception hidden in plain sight. Each memory stabbed at her, twisting the knife deeper. But instead of letting it destroy her, Brianna decided to use it as fuel. The nurses came in regularly, checking her progress, always gentle and kind, but Brianna barely acknowledged them. They didn't know her pain, and she wasn't about to share it. In her silence, she nurtured the rage that kept her alive. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. Her family had visited only a handful of times. They had their lives, and it seemed she was a burden to them, just as she had always been. Her mother's concerned words, spoken with forced gentleness, offered no comfort. They exchanged empty conversations, but nothing was ever said about Ryan or the accident beyond the surface. One evening, as she lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles for what felt like the 100th time, a knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Expecting a nurse, Brianna turned her head slightly, but instead, she found herself face to face with Dr. Michael Reynolds, the plastic surgeon who had been consulted on her case. He was tall, with an air of quiet confidence, his brown hair tinged with silver at the edges. He smiled politely, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity perhaps, that made Brianna sit up a little straighter, despite the pain it caused. "Good evening, Brianna," he greeted, his voice calm and soothing. "I've been monitoring your recovery since the accident. Your injuries were severe, but you're healing remarkably well." Brianna forced a small nod, unsure of what to say. She had little interest in the medical details of her recovery. What did it matter? She was still the same broken woman beneath it all. Dr. Reynolds pulled up a chair beside her bed, his expression turning more serious. "I understand you've been through a lot. I don't just mean physically. Trauma like this can affect us in ways we don't always expect." She bit her lip, resisting the urge to scoff, as if anyone could understand the depth of her pain. "I'm not here to offer platitudes," he continued, as though sensing her resistance. "But I do want to talk about something that could be life-changing for you." At those words, Brianna's attention sharpened. Life-changing? Could he possibly know what she was planning? What she so desperately wanted? Dr. Reynolds leaned in slightly. "Plastic surgery isn't just about appearances. It's about transformation, healing. Sometimes, after traumatic events, people need a new beginning. I can help with that." Brianna's heart raced. His words resonated with the fire that had been burning inside her since the accident. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to finally shed her old self and become the woman she had always dreamed of being. No more ridicule, no more being looked down on, no more being unseen. "You don't know anything about me," Brianna whispered, her voice barely audible. Dr. Reynolds didn't flinch. "I don't have to know everything. What I do know is that after what you've been through, you deserve to take control of your life. And if that means changing how the world sees you, I can help." For the first time since the accident, Brianna felt something akin to hope stir within her. But it wasn't the soft, comforting kind. It was sharper, more focused. It was the hope of a woman who had decided that the world would pay for every ounce of her suffering. "Tell me more," she said, her voice stronger now, betraying the excitement she tried to suppress. Dr. Reynolds nodded, sensing her interest. He began to explain the options available to her: reconstructive surgery for the damage caused by the accident, as well as cosmetic surgery that could reshape her body, her face, her entire image. It wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about creating something new, something better. "You'll need time to recover, both physically and emotionally," he warned. "This isn't an easy process, but if you're determined, I can promise you that you'll come out the other side as a new person." A new person. That was exactly what Brianna wanted, needed. She had no use for her old life, her old self. They had failed her. But a new face, a new body, would give her the power to control her destiny. She could rewrite the narrative of her life and erase the humiliation that had haunted her for so long. When can we start? She asked, her eyes locking onto his with a cold intensity. Dr. Reynolds smiled slightly. I'll need to run a few tests, but if everything looks good, we can start within a few weeks. Brianna nodded, her mind already racing ahead, imagining the woman she would become. No longer the broken, betrayed wife. No longer the insecure, overweight woman. She would become a force to be reckoned with. And when the world saw her, when they saw her, they would regret every cruel word, every lie, every betrayal. As Dr. Reynolds left her room, Brianna felt a sense of purpose filling the emptiness that had consumed her. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer helpless. The path ahead of her was clear, and for the first time in months, she felt alive. This was her fall, but it would also be the beginning of her rise. Brianna's days in the hospital blurred into one another, but something had shifted within her. She no longer spent her time wallowing in the agony of betrayal. Instead, she was consumed by a singular thought: rebirth. Her future was no longer something to be dreaded. It had become her obsession. The plans for her transformation, both inside and out, occupied her every waking thought. With each passing day, her body healed. Her bruises faded, her cuts slowly stitched themselves together, and the fractured bones began to mend. But the real recovery, the one that mattered, was happening in her mind. Every moment she spent in that hospital bed, she meticulously crafted her path forward. The visits from Dr. Reynolds became more frequent. He was professional, but there was an understanding between them now, an unspoken agreement. He wasn't just her surgeon, he was the architect of her new self. Brianna appreciated that he didn't try to dig into her past, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He was the only person who understood that her desire for transformation wasn't superficial, it was a matter of survival. One afternoon, as Dr. Reynolds sat beside her, they went over the details of her upcoming procedures. His calm, methodical explanations about the surgeries gave Brianna a sense of control she hadn't felt in a long time. Each procedure, each step, was a brick in the foundation of the new woman she would become. "You've had time to think about this," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Are you ready for everything this will entail? The surgeries, the recovery. It's going to be difficult." Brianna didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll start with the most immediate. First, we'll address the reconstructive surgery for the injuries from the accident. Once that's done, and you've healed, we'll begin the cosmetic procedures." Brianna felt her pulse quicken. Each step he outlined felt like one more link in the chain that was dragging her away from her old life. "The weight loss will take time," Dr. Reynolds continued, "but with surgery and a strict regimen, it's achievable. You'll have to be committed, physically and mentally." "I'll do whatever it takes," she replied, her voice firm. He smiled slightly, admiring her resolve. "Good. Once we've reshaped your body, we'll move to your face. The procedures are extensive, but we'll work to create a natural, balanced result. The goal isn't just to change your appearance, but to give you back your confidence." Confidence. That was what Brianna lacked for so long, what had been eroded by years of subtle rejections and whispered insults. But confidence wasn't the only thing she wanted. She wanted power. The power to walk into a room and command attention, the power to make Ryan and Jessica feel the way she had felt. Small, worthless, defeated. "When it's all done," Brianna said slowly, her eyes distant, "no one will recognize me, will they?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated before answering. "It's possible. Your face, your body, they'll be different, yes. But the question is, will you be different? Changing how you look is one thing, but what you carry inside, that's harder to change." Brianna met his gaze, her expression hardened. "I've already changed, doctor. This is just the final step." He nodded, understanding that her determination wasn't just about appearance. "Very well. We'll proceed according to the plan. You should know that these surgeries, especially when done in succession, are demanding. Your body will be pushed to its limits." "I'm ready," Brianna repeated. There was no room for doubt. Pain was temporary. The reward would be eternal. Over the next few days, Brianna underwent a series of tests to prepare for the surgeries. Dr. Reynolds' team was thorough, making sure her body could handle the strain of multiple procedures. Brianna barely listened to the details. All she cared about outcome. One night, as she lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of her new life, She picked up her phone for the first time since the accident. Ryan's messages and missed calls still littered the screen. Her finger hovered over his name, but she didn't open them. She wasn't ready to face him. Not yet, but soon, very soon. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in years. She Googled the nearest plastic surgeons, researching the most expensive, most exclusive clinics. She scanned through success stories, looked at before and after photos of women who had once been like her, overweight, unattractive, invisible. And now they were goddesses, stunningly beautiful, untouchable. That's what she would become, untouchable. The internet was a treasure trove of stories about people who had remade themselves. Some were successful, others were cautionary tales of what went wrong. Brianna wasn't interested in those failures. She focused only on the victories, the women who had gone under the knife and emerged as new people, their pasts erased, their futures wide open. A surge of excitement, mingled with fear, ran through her. What would it be like to walk into a room and see Ryan's eyes widen in shock? To see Jessica's smug smile fade when she realized who the new woman before her really was? The thought of revenge was intoxicating, and it kept Brianna awake long after the lights in her hospital room had dimmed. Her mind raced with scenarios of how she would confront them, of the power she would hold over them. She would strip away everything they valued, just as they had stripped her of her dignity. But this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about Brianna reclaiming her life, her version of life, one in which she would no longer be the victim, but the victor. The next morning, as Dr. Reynolds entered her room, Brianna was more ready than ever. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. "I've scheduled the first surgery for next week," he informed her. "You'll need a few days to prepare mentally and physically, but from then on, everything will move quickly." "I want to start as soon as possible," Brianna said. "Understood. This is a journey, Brianna. I know you want immediate results, but remember, the real change happens over time. Stay committed, and you'll get where you want to be." Brianna smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "Don't worry, doctor. I've waited my whole life for this. I can wait a little longer." As Dr. Reynolds left the room, Brianna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her old self begin to slip away. She wasn't just healing from an accident. She was building something new, piece by piece. The resurrection had begun. The day of Brianna's first surgery arrived like a whisper in the night, quiet, but filled with the weight of everything she'd been preparing for. The hospital room, once a place of despair, now felt like a cocoon, and she was ready to emerge. But before she could spread her wings, she had to endure the pain that would sculpt her into something new. The hospital gown clung loosely to her recovering body, still fragile from the accident. As she stared at her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall, she didn't see the woman she once was, the woman Ryan and Jessica had betrayed. She saw someone new, someone waiting to be born. Her bruises had mostly healed, but the psychological scars remained. Those wouldn't fade so easily, but Brianna welcomed them now. They were reminders of what had brought her to this moment. Dr. Reynolds entered the room, his usual calm demeanor in place. He stood beside her, explaining once again the steps they'd take today, the first reconstructive surgery to repair the lingering damage from the accident. But Brianna didn't need to hear the details again. She trusted him. "Are you nervous?" he asked, pulling on a pair of surgical gloves as the nurse prepped the room. Brianna shook her head. "No, I've been waiting for this. I'm ready." Dr. Reynolds smiled slightly. "That's good. Remember, this is the beginning. It's not the end, but you're taking the first step toward what you want." She nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the hospital bed. It was a strange feeling, letting go of control, putting her fate in the hands of someone else, but there was an undeniable trust between them. Dr. Reynolds was more than just her surgeon now. He was the sculptor of her new identity, and she would be his masterpiece. The nurse inserted the IV into her arm, and Brianna watched the clear liquid flow into her veins. The sedative began to take effect, pulling her into a warm, drowsy state. Her eyelids grew heavy as she heard the faint beeping of the machines around her, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. As her vision blurred, the last thought that crossed her mind was simple: I'm leaving her behind. The old Brianna, the one who had been broken and betrayed, would no longer exist after today. The hours that followed passed in a haze. Brianna drifted in and out of consciousness, her body still under the heavy influence of anesthesia. When she finally woke, it was to the gentle murmur of voices around her. She felt disoriented, her mind still foggy, but there was a sense of relief that washed over her. The surgery was over. Dr. Reynolds was there, standing beside her bed. His expression was calm, reassuring. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. Brianna tried to speak, but her throat felt dry and her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Tired." "That's normal," he said with a smile. "The surgery went well. The damage from the accident has been repaired, and you'll begin healing soon. We'll give it a few weeks before we move on to the next phase." She nodded weakly, her body too exhausted to process the full weight of his words. This was the first step, but it was a monumental one. The physical pain she felt now, stiffness, soreness, the dull ache radiating through her body, was insignificant compared to the emotional turmoil she had endured. She could bear this. She would bear it all. Days passed, and Brianna's body slowly began to heal. The swelling from the surgery decreased, and the bruising faded. She spent hours in her hospital bed, feeling the subtle changes in her body, the new contours forming as Dr. Reynolds' work took effect. But it wasn't just her body that was changing. Her mind was shifting too, hardening with each passing day. One afternoon, while resting in her hospital bed, Brianna decided it was time. She reached for her phone and opened Ryan's messages. Dozens of missed calls, unread texts, all variations of the same thing. "I'm sorry. We need to talk. Please answer me." Brianna's heart didn't race as it once would have. She didn't feel the pang of sadness that used to strike her at the thought of Ryan. All she felt now was a cold, detached resolve. She had no interest in speaking to him, not yet at least. Not until she was ready to reveal her new self. Until then, he was just another part of her past, a chapter she would close when the time was right. Instead of replying to his texts, she did something different. She opened a new email and began writing. The email was addressed to Jessica. Brianna paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, with a slow exhale, she began to type. "Jessica, it's been a while. I haven't spoken to you since everything happened, but I've had time to think. I'm not the same person I was before, and I wanted to reach out. There are things we need to talk about, things you need to hear from me. I'm sure you've heard about the accident. I'm recovering now, but I've decided that once I'm fully healed, I want to meet. Just the two of us. No Ryan, no excuses, just us. There's something you need to know, and it's better said face to face." Brianna. Her heart pounded as she read over the words, but not with fear. It was excitement, anticipation. This was the first step in her plan, reaching out, making contact, drawing Jessica into her web. Brianna wasn't stupid. She knew Jessica would be suspicious, but that didn't matter. Jessica's arrogance would be her downfall. She wouldn't see what was coming. Brianna hit send. As the email left her inbox, a sense of satisfaction filled her. She leaned back against the pillows, closing her eyes as the faint sound of her heart monitor beeped in the background. The road ahead was long, but it was clear now. She could see the end game, her victory. Weeks passed, and Brianna continued her recovery. With each passing day, she felt stronger, both physically and mentally. The reconstructive surgery had been a success, and Dr. Reynolds had already scheduled the first cosmetic procedure. This would be the real turning point, the transformation she had been waiting for. One evening, Dr. Reynolds came to her room, his demeanor more serious than usual. He sat down beside her bed, flipping through her chart before speaking. "Brianna, we're ready to move forward with the next surgery. This will be one of the most significant changes. Are you prepared?" She looked at him, her eyes steely with determination. "Yes, let's do it." The next procedure would be the one that truly erased her old self, the one that would create the woman she needed to become. And when it was done, there would be no turning back. Brianna smiled to herself as she closed her eyes. Soon, the world would see her for who she really was. And then, they would all pay. The day of the second surgery dawned with a crisp brightness that contrasted with the weight of what was about to happen. Brianna sat in her hospital room, gazing out the window as the sun climbed higher into the sky. The reflection of her face in the glass seemed distant, like someone she no longer recognized. In a few hours, even the vague remnants of her old self would be gone. Dr. Reynolds arrived promptly, his demeanor as calm and confident as always. Brianna was grateful for that. His steady professionalism gave her the assurance she needed. There was no room for doubt, not now. The woman she would become after today would be unrecognizable, not just to the world, but to her enemies. That thought alone fueled her determination. This surgery will be more extensive than the last, Dr. Reynolds explained as he flipped through her charts. We'll focus on reshaping your face, creating the contours you want, enhancing features, and adjusting the areas we discussed. You'll also undergo liposuction and body sculpting to start your weight loss process. It's going to be a lot for your body to handle, but you're ready. Brianna nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of her hospital bed. I'm ready. Dr. Reynolds gave her a long look, studying her face as if committing it to memory. It's important to remember, he said gently, that while this transformation is physical, the most important changes happen inside. You're not just changing how the world sees you, you're changing how you see yourself. Brianna's eyes met his, cold and resolute. I know who I am now. This is just catching up with what's already inside me. Satisfied with her answer, Dr. Reynolds nodded and signaled to the nurse. As Brianna lay back on the bed, the cold, sterile room faded into the background. She felt the needle prick her arm as the anesthetic flowed through her veins, pulling her toward unconsciousness. The last thing she saw was Dr. Reynolds' calm face as the world around her dissolved into darkness. When Brianna woke again, it was to an overwhelming sense of heaviness. Her entire body felt weighed down, not just by the bandages, but by the enormity of what had just happened. She blinked slowly, her vision adjusting to the dim lighting in the recovery room. Her face felt tight, swollen, and wrapped in layers of gauze, and she could barely move without feeling the soreness in her abdomen and thighs. But despite the discomfort, there was a strange sense of satisfaction brewing inside her. She had done it. The old Brianna had finally been buried beneath the surgeon's scalpel, and in her place, the new woman was emerging. It would take weeks, maybe months, for the full transformation to reveal itself. But Brianna knew it was only a matter of time before she saw her true self in the mirror. Dr. Reynolds visited her that evening, his expression unreadable as he checked her vitals and examined her bandages. You did well, he said quietly. The surgery went smoothly. We'll have to wait for the swelling to go down before you can see the results, but everything looks good. Brianna nodded weakly, unable to speak yet from the pain and swelling in her face. Her body ached in ways she hadn't expected, but it was a small price to pay for what lay ahead. Remember, Brianna, Dr. Reynolds continued, this is just the beginning. You'll need to take care of yourself during the recovery process. Follow the regimen I've laid out, your diet, your exercise. This is a long road, but you're on the right path. She blinked slowly in response, her mind too foggy from the painkillers to fully grasp the significance of his words. All she could think about was the final result. What would she look like when the bandages came off? Would she even recognize herself? The days following the surgery were some of the hardest Brianna had ever experienced. Her body, fragile from the reconstructive surgery, was now being pushed to its limits by the second, more extensive procedure. The pain was constant, a dull, throbbing reminder of the price she had chosen to pay for her transformation. But she didn't care. Every ache, every moment of discomfort was a step closer to her goal. The nurses tended to her with quiet efficiency, changing her bandages and administering pain medication, but Brianna barely registered their presence. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of what she would look like when the healing process was complete. She imagined herself walking into a room, heads turning, eyes widening in admiration. No one would laugh at her. No one would whisper behind her back. She would be the center of attention, the woman everyone wanted to be. A week after the surgery, Dr. Reynolds returned to check on her progress. The swelling had gone down considerably, and though Brianna couldn't see herself yet, she could feel the difference. Her body felt lighter, her skin tighter, and the subtle changes in her face were becoming more noticeable, even beneath the bandages. We're almost ready to remove the bandages, Dr. Reynolds said one afternoon, his voice calm but tinged with anticipation. You've been healing well. Are you ready to see the results? Brianna's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the unveiling of the new her. Her pulse quickened as Dr. Reynolds carefully unwrapped the bandages from her face, each layer revealing a little more of what lay beneath. When the last bandage was removed, Brianna stared at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the reflection that stared back at her. Her face, once soft and round, was now sharp and defined. Her nose was smaller, more delicate, and her cheeks were higher, giving her an almost ethereal beauty. Her lips, full and perfectly shaped, curved slightly as she took in the new contours of her face. She blinked, running her fingers lightly over her new features, marveling at how different she looked. The woman in the mirror wasn't Brianna, not the Brianna who had been laughed at, cheated on, betrayed. This was someone else, someone powerful, someone beautiful. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of victory. This was it. This was the face that would make them all regret underestimating her. Ryan, Jessica, everyone who had ever looked down on her. "I told you it would be worth it," Dr. Reynolds said softly, watching her reaction. Brianna nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. It was worth it. Every moment of pain, every scar, every ounce of effort had led her here. She wasn't done yet, but this was the most significant step. Her body still needed time to heal, and there were still adjustments to be made, but the foundation was in place. The woman she had become was no longer just an idea in her head. She was real, and she was ready to step into the world. But first, there was one more thing she needed to do. As Dr. Reynolds left the room, Brianna picked up her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen as she typed a message to Ryan. "We need to talk." She sent the message and smiled at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was no longer the betrayed wife. She was someone else now, someone stronger. And she wasn't finished yet. The moment Brianna sent the message to Ryan, she felt an unfamiliar sense of power. For so long, she had been the one chasing after him, seeking validation, approval, love. Now, she was in control, and it felt intoxicating. The days of being ignored, laughed at, or pitied were over. Brianna's transformation was complete, on the outside at least. But there was more to be done. It wasn't enough to have a new face, a new body. She needed a new identity, one that would allow her to step into the world without the baggage of her past. Brianna Stanton was dead. The woman who had been ridiculed and betrayed no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, sharper, and far more dangerous. As she sat in front of the mirror, her new face still glowing with the fresh sheen of recovery, a name rolled through her mind. It was elegant, but commanding. It was a name that would be whispered with admiration and envy, and most importantly, it was a name that had no connection to her former life. Sophia Vaughn. It felt right. Sophia was poised, powerful, someone who could walk into any room and command attention. Sophia wasn't the woman who had cried herself to sleep over a cheating husband and a backstabbing best friend. She wasn't the overweight, insecure woman people mocked behind her back. No, Sophia was a force of nature, and nothing would stand in her way. With her new name settled in her mind, Brianna, now Sophia, turned her attention back to her phone. She hadn't heard back from Ryan yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Her message had been simple and direct, designed to grab his attention without revealing too much. The power had shifted. Now, he would be the one waiting. A few hours later, as Sophia rested in her hospital bed, her phone buzzed. Her heart skipped a beat, but this time it wasn't out of anxiety or fear. It was excitement. The game was about to begin. The message from Ryan was short, almost desperate. "Brianna, please, we need to talk. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Can we meet?" Sophia smiled, imagining the look on his face when he saw her. He wouldn't recognize her, at least not at first. That was the beauty of it. The woman he thought he knew was gone, and when he saw what she had become, he would be filled with regret. He would beg for her forgiveness, and she would revel in his misery. "Meet me at 8 p.m. tomorrow." "I'll send the address," she typed back, keeping the message cryptic and cool. There was no need to rush. Ryan was hers now, whether he realized it or not. The next day, Sophia prepared herself meticulously. Every detail had to be perfect. The way her hair fell around her newly sculpted face, the makeup that accentuated her flawless features, the sleek black dress that hugged her slim, curvaceous body. She was no longer hiding behind layers of insecurity. Tonight, she would unveil the new version of herself. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, hardly able to believe the transformation. Her once round face was now angular, sharp, with high cheekbones that gave her an almost regal appearance. Her eyes, once overlooked, now drew attention with their intensity. And her lips, full, seductive, completed the picture of a woman who had mastered herself. When she arrived at the upscale restaurant she had chosen for the meeting, Sophia felt eyes turn toward her as she walked through the door. This was what she had always dreamed of, to be the center of attention, to be seen. The hostess greeted her with a smile and led her to a private table in the back. Sophia sat, her heart steady, her mind clear. This was her moment. A few minutes later, Ryan arrived. He walked in nervously, scanning the room, his brow furrowed in confusion. When his eyes finally landed on her, they widened in disbelief. He stopped in his tracks, clearly unsure of what he was seeing. "Brianna?" he asked, his voice hesitant, as if he couldn't believe the woman sitting before him was the same person he once knew. Sophia smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Not anymore." Ryan stood there, stunned, as if he were looking at a stranger, and in a way, he was. The woman who had loved him so deeply, who had been willing to forgive his betrayal, was gone. In her place sat Sophia Vaughn, a woman who had risen from the ashes of her former life, more beautiful and dangerous than he could ever have imagined. "Sit down, Ryan," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "We have a lot to talk about." Ryan stumbled into the chair opposite her, his eyes still locked on her face, trying to make sense of the transformation. What happened to you?" Sophia tilted her head slightly, watching him squirm. "You happened, Ryan. You and Jessica. I had to become someone new, someone strong enough to deal with the both of you." He blinked, clearly struggling to find the right words. I'm sorry, Brianna. I didn't mean for things to end up like this. I've been trying to reach you since the accident. I was worried." Sophia's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Worried? About me, or about your little affair being exposed?" Ryan's face paled. He opened his mouth to respond, but Sophia cut him off. "Don't bother lying. I know everything, and it's too late to apologize. I'm not here for your excuses, Ryan. I'm here because I wanted you to see what you've lost." Her words hung in the air like a dagger, sharp and lethal. Ryan's eyes darted around the room, as if he were searching for a way out, but there was none. He was trapped, and they both knew it. "You don't understand," he stammered. "It wasn't like that with Jessica. It was a mistake. I was confused, and Sophia held up a hand, silencing him. "I don't care, Ryan. I really don't. You're not important to me anymore. I've moved on." The truth in her words hit him hard. He could see it in her eyes. She didn't love him anymore. The power he had once held over her was gone, and in its place was something much more terrifying: indifference. "You're free to live your life however you want," Sophia continued, her voice cold. "But I want you to know that I'll always be watching. And if you or Jessica ever think about crossing me again, well, let's just say you won't like what happens." Ryan swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his drink. "Brianna?" "Sophia," she corrected, her gaze icy. "My name is Sophia Vaughn now. Brianna Stanton is dead." The words hit Ryan like a sledgehammer. He stared at her, realization dawning slowly. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the vulnerable, broken wife he had betrayed. She was something else entirely, and he didn't know how to handle her. Sophia leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She had won. Ryan was no longer a part of her life, and she had made sure he understood that. Now all that was left was Jessica. As she stood to leave, Ryan remained frozen in his seat, his eyes still wide with shock. "Goodbye, Ryan," she said softly, her voice carrying a finality that left no room for doubt. "I hope you and Jessica enjoy your lives together. You deserve each other." With that, Sophia walked out of the restaurant, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a confidence she had never felt before. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped outside, and she breathed it in deeply. She was free. Free from Ryan, free from her past, free from the pain that had once consumed her. But her journey wasn't over. There was still one person left on her list, Jessica. And Sophia was just getting started. Sophia had always imagined how it would feel to face Jessica again. The memory of her best friend's betrayal burned in her mind, sharper than the sting of Ryan's infidelity. Jessica had been more than just a friend. She had been a confidant, someone Brianna had trusted with her innermost secrets, her deepest insecurities. And it was Jessica who had twisted the knife, all the while smiling in her face. That was the hardest part to swallow. But Sophia Vaughn was not Brianna Stanton. She was no longer the insecure, overweight woman who had been used and discarded. She was a phoenix, reborn from the ashes of her past, and Jessica had no idea what was coming. As she prepared for her meeting with Jessica, Sophia's mind was cold and calculating. She knew this confrontation would be different from the one with Ryan. Jessica wasn't a coward, and she wouldn't be easily rattled. She had to approach it carefully, not with rage, but with precision. Revenge was an art form, and tonight would be her masterpiece. Sophia chose a different venue for this meeting, a small, exclusive cocktail bar downtown, the type of place where the elite gathered, where people whispered instead of shouted. It was the kind of place Jessica would never expect to see Brianna, and that was precisely the point. Sophia was no longer part of Jessica's world of comfortable betrayal. She had ascended to a place where Jessica would feel out of her depth. The day before, Sophia had sent Jessica a brief email. It was as simple and direct as the one she'd sent Ryan. "Jessica, we need to talk. No excuses, no delays. Meet me at the address below tomorrow at 9 p.m. She hadn't bothered to sign the message with her old name. There was no need. Jessica would know exactly who it was from. The bar was dimly lit, elegant but intimate, the soft murmur of conversations filling the air. Sophia arrived early, choosing a seat in the corner where she could watch the entrance. She sipped her cocktail, her eyes sharp, her senses alert. Every nerve in her body tingled with anticipation. At exactly 9 p.m., Jessica walked in. Sophia had to admit, Jessica looked as impeccable as ever. She was dressed in a sleek, fitted black dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. But there was something different about her tonight. A wariness in her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. It was subtle, but Sophia noticed it. Good. She was already on edge. Jessica scanned the room, her gaze finally landing on Sophia, but her expression didn't change. She hesitated for just a second before walking over, her high heels clicking against the polished floor. When she reached the table, Jessica's eyes widened slightly, just enough to show that she had noticed the transformation. "Brianna?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Sophia smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "Sophia," she corrected, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Please, sit." Jessica blinked, clearly thrown off balance. She slid into the chair, her movements less confident than usual. She looked Sophia up and down, her eyes trying to comprehend what she was seeing. "You've changed." That's an understatement," Sophia said, her tone calm, almost conversational. She took a slow sip of her drink, watching Jessica's every move, every flicker of emotion. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a game, and Sophia held all the cards. Jessica cleared her throat, regaining some of her composure. "I got your email. What is this about?" Sophia set her drink down, leaning forward slightly. "This is about the lies, the betrayal, the years you spent pretending to be my friend while you were sleeping with my husband." Jessica flinched at the directness, but she quickly composed herself, folding her hands in her lap. "Brianna, Sophia," she interrupted, her voice cutting like glass. "Brianna is dead. You killed her." Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly, the guilt flickering in her gaze now replaced with something harder, defensiveness. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." Sophia tilted her head, studying her former friend with cold detachment. "It just happened?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's your excuse for betraying me?" "I didn't plan it," Jessica said, her voice tight. "It wasn't like I set out to destroy our friendship. It was a mistake." "A mistake," Sophia echoed, her gaze icy. "Is that how you justify it to yourself, Jessica? Is that what helps you sleep at night?" Jessica swallowed hard, but her jaw clenched. "What do you want from me, Brianna? Sophia?" She corrected herself quickly. "Do you want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you. But you're not the only one who's suffered." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how exactly have you suffered, Jessica? You've got my husband. You've got your perfect life. What have you lost?" Jessica's expression hardened. "I lost my best friend," she said quietly. "I know I betrayed you, and I've had to live with that every day. But don't think for a second that I haven't paid for it too." Sophia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. She let the silence hang between them for a moment, savoring the tension. "You think this is about friendship?" she asked finally, her voice low. "You think I'm here to hear your sob story about how hard it's been for you?" Jessica looked confused, her eyes narrowing. Then what is this about? Sophia's smile returned, slow and deliberate. This is about consequences, Jessica. You've never had to face any real consequences for what you did. But that's about to change. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. What are you talking about? Sophia leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not here for revenge, Jessica. I'm here to show you how irrelevant you are now, you and Ryan both. You thought you could betray me, destroy me, and walk away unscathed. But look at me. She spread her hands out, gesturing to herself. I've risen above it. I've become someone better, someone stronger. And you? You're still stuck in your little life, pretending everything's fine. Jessica stared at her, her face pale, her confidence crumbling. What are you saying? I'm saying that you're nothing to me now, Sophia said, her voice cold. You've lost your power over me. I don't need to destroy you, Jessica. You've already done that to yourself. Jessica's hands trembled slightly, but she tried to keep her voice steady. I don't know what you expect from me. I can't change the past. I don't expect anything from you, Sophia said smoothly. I just wanted you to see who I've become, to show you that your betrayal didn't break me. It made me stronger. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked like she was struggling to understand the magnitude of what was happening, like she was grappling with the fact that the woman sitting across from her wasn't the Brianna she had once known. Sophia stood up, taking one last sip of her drink before setting the glass down. Enjoy your life with Ryan, she said, her voice calm but laced with a dangerous edge. But remember, Jessica, I'll always be watching. And if you ever cross me again, you'll regret it. Jessica's eyes widened in fear, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. What are you going to do? She whispered. Sophia smiled, a slow, chilling smile. You'll find out if you ever give me a reason to. With that, she turned and walked out of the bar, leaving Jessica behind, frozen in her seat. As she stepped into the cool night air, Sophia felt lighter, freer than she had in years. She had confronted the ghosts of her past, and they no longer held any power over her. The old Brianna was gone, and Sophia Vaughn had fully emerged. Now, the world was hers for the taking. As Sophia left the bar that night, her heels clicking on the pavement with confidence, the rush of victory that had filled her began to ebb away. It wasn't defeat she felt. It was more like the lingering sting of an old wound. Though she had faced Jessica and won, the encounter had left a taste in her mouth that wasn't quite as sweet as she had imagined. For so long, her life had been defined by the pain of betrayal. First, Ryan, then Jessica, two people she had loved, trusted, and built her life around. And in return, they had shattered her. Her transformation into Sophia Vaughn had been her way of taking back power, of proving to herself and to them that she was stronger than the woman they had destroyed. But now, standing outside the bar in the cool night air, Sophia realized something unsettling. The revenge she had been craving, the sweet taste of watching Jessica squirm, wasn't filling the void she had hoped it would. The scars from their betrayal still lingered, no matter how beautifully sculpted her new face was, no matter how flawless her body had become. The pain was still there. It had merely changed its form. Sophia hailed a cab and gave the driver her address, staring out the window as the city lights flickered by. She had rebuilt herself, yes, but at what cost? The anger, the thirst for revenge had sustained her for so long that now, without it, she felt hollow. The new Sophia Vaughn was powerful, beautiful, and envied, but she was also deeply alone. The taxi stopped in front of her new apartment, an upscale place she had moved into after the final stages of her transformation. The building exuded luxury, with polished floors, marble accents, and neighbors who barely noticed each other. It was perfect for her, anonymous and untouchable. But as Sophia stepped into the gleaming lobby and made her way to the elevator, the sense of isolation gnawed at her. The elevator doors slid open silently, and as she stepped inside, her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal walls. Sophia had to admit, the woman looking back was stunning. Everything about her was crafted for perfection. But the eyes hadn't changed. They were still Brianna's eyes, filled with old wounds that hadn't healed. As she stepped into her apartment, the silence was deafening. The minimalist decor, sleek, modern, and cold, offered no warmth, no comfort. Sophia had chosen this place for its beauty, its distance from her old life. But now it felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. She poured herself a glass of wine, settling into the plush white couch. The confrontation with Jessica replayed in her mind, and for the first time, she questioned if it had been worth it. Jessica had looked shaken, even scared, but there had been no real satisfaction in it. Sophia hadn't expected an apology, nor did she want one, but she had thought that facing Jessica would give her closure, a sense of finality. Instead, it felt unfinished. As the night wore on, Sophia found herself lost in thought, her mind drifting back to the past. She had remade herself so completely that sometimes it felt like Brianna had never existed. But Brianna's memories, her scars, were still there, buried beneath the layers of plastic surgery, weight loss, and newfound confidence. There was one scar in particular that still hadn't healed, the night of the accident. Sophia had buried that memory deep, along with the woman she used to be. But now, as she sat alone in her apartment, the details of that night resurfaced, sharper than ever. She hadn't just been drinking to numb the pain of Ryan's betrayal that night. She had been driving, recklessly, speeding through the dark streets, lost in her fury and heartbreak. The crash had been violent, the impact brutal. When she woke in the hospital, bruised and broken, it wasn't just her body that had been shattered. It was her entire world. Sophia clenched her glass tightly, her knuckles white. She had never allowed herself to truly face the truth of that night. It had been easier to focus on her transformation, on becoming someone else, someone stronger. But now, the memory of the crash, the sound of screeching tires, the moment of impact, all of it came flooding back. She had nearly died that night, and part of her had wished she had. Brianna, the woman she had been so consumed by pain that death seemed like a release. But she hadn't died. She had survived, and in doing so, she had sworn to herself that she would never be weak again. But here she was, still haunted by the past, still carrying the scars of that night. Sophia stood up abruptly, pacing the length of her apartment. She couldn't keep living like this, constantly running from the pain, constantly hiding behind the mask of her new identity. She had created Sophia Vaughn to escape Brianna's weakness, but the truth was, Brianna's pain had never really left her. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a text from Ryan. "We need to talk." Sophia stared at the message from Ryan, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, leaving Ryan to stew in his own guilt and regret, just as he had left her drowning in betrayal. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. She had told herself that she was done with him, that her new life didn't have room for Ryan or the pain he had caused. And yet, here she was, standing frozen in the middle of her apartment, her heart racing as she read his message over and over. "We need to talk." What could he possibly want? An apology? Closure? Sophia scoffed at the idea. Ryan had never been the kind of man to face his mistakes head-on. He had always run from conflict, choosing instead to lie, to manipulate, to hide. But now, after everything that had happened, he wanted to talk. The old Brianna would have jumped at the chance. She would have clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Ryan had changed, that he had finally realized what he had lost. But Sophia wasn't Brianna. She wasn't that desperate, broken woman anymore. She typed a response quickly, before she could second-guess herself. "There's nothing left to say." She hit send, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. It was simple, direct. She didn't owe Ryan anything more than that. And yet, as the seconds ticked by and no reply came, an unsettling feeling settled in her chest. Why did he want to talk? Was it about Jessica? Did they both realize now that they couldn't erase her from their lives, even if they had tried? Her phone buzzed again. "Please, just meet me. One last time. I need to explain." Sophia's jaw clenched. Ryan's words tugged at something deep inside her, a part of herself that she had spent months trying to kill, the part of her that had once loved him despite everything he had done. She wanted to believe that she was stronger than this, that she had risen above the need for closure. But the scars Ryan had left on her heart were deeper than she had admitted to herself. One last time. The words echoed in her mind, tempting her with the promise of resolution. Maybe it was time to close this chapter for good. She had confronted Jessica, forced her to see the new woman Sophia had become. But Ryan was the one who had truly broken her. He had been the source of her deepest wounds, and until she faced him, those wounds would never fully heal. Against her better judgment, she typed back a response. "Fine. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., send the location." She set her phone down, her mind racing. The decision had been made. Tomorrow she would face Ryan, and this time she would be the one in control. The next evening arrived faster than Sophia had expected. She spent the day preparing, her mind oscillating between anger and a strange sense of curiosity. What could Ryan possibly say that would change anything? What explanation could he give that would make up for the months of deceit, the lies, the affair with Jessica? As she dressed, she chose an outfit that projected power, a sleek, dark red dress that hugged her new figure, paired with sharp heels and minimal jewelry. She wanted Ryan to see the woman she had become, not the woman he had discarded. The location Ryan had sent was a small, intimate bar on the outskirts of the city, far from the glamorous places they used to frequent as a couple. It was almost ironic, meeting in such a low-key place, as if Ryan wanted to hide from the world the same way he had hidden his affair. When Sophia arrived, the bar was nearly empty. She stepped inside, the dim lighting casting shadows on the worn leather booths and wooden tables. Her heels clicked against the floor as she made her way to the back, where she spotted Ryan sitting alone at a corner table. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. Sophia had expected the shock, but it still gave her a small, cold thrill. She watched as Ryan struggled to mask his surprise, his eyes taking in the sharp lines of her face, the confidence in her walk. "Sophia," he said, his voice uncertain, as though he didn't quite believe she was real. She slid into the seat across from him, keeping her expression neutral. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Ryan leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table, his expression earnest. "I know I've hurt you. I know that no matter what I say, I can't undo what's happened. But I need you to understand that it wasn't as simple as you think." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her patience thin. "Enlighten me then. What was it, Ryan? A midlife crisis? A mistake? You just fell into an affair with my best friend?" Ryan winced, but he didn't look away. "I know I messed up, but I need you to know that it wasn't because I didn't love you. Sophia cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Love? You think this was about love? You don't betray the people you love, Ryan. You don't lie to them, cheat on them, make them feel like they're worthless." Ryan's face fell, the weight of her words hitting him hard. He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with something close to regret. "You're right. I can't excuse what I did, but I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I never stopped caring about you." Sophia's expression hardened. "Caring about me? If you cared about me, you wouldn't have torn my life apart. You wouldn't have left me broken." Ryan leaned back, running a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know how to handle it. Our marriage, it felt like we were both just going through the motions. And with Jessica, I didn't plan for it to happen. It just..." "There it is again," Sophia interrupted, her voice cold. "It just happened. You want me to believe that you were a passive victim in all of this? That it wasn't a choice?" Ryan stared at her, his expression one of defeat. "I made choices, and they were the wrong ones. I know that now. But you have to understand, I was lost too. I didn't know how to fix what was broken between us." Sophia's anger flared, but it was tempered by something else now. Pity. Ryan looked pathetic, sitting across from her, trying to explain away his betrayal with weak excuses. She had expected more from him, some grand revelation, but all she was getting was the same tired script. For the first time, she realized that Ryan wasn't the man she had once loved. He was weak, lost, and incapable of true remorse. And just like that, the last remnants of her attachment to him evaporated. "You were lost," she repeated softly, her voice full of contempt. "And so you destroyed everything around you." Ryan's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Sophia almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I'm not here to fix you, Ryan," she said quietly. "I'm not here to make you feel better about yourself. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. But don't ever think for a second that I'll let you or Jessica back into my life." Ryan nodded, his face crumpling as the realization hit him. "I'm sorry, Brianna." Sophia smiled, but it was cold and final. "My name is Sophia, and this is goodbye." She stood up, leaving Ryan behind in the dimly lit bar, and as she stepped outside into the night, She felt lighter. The old wounds, the scars of betrayal, they were still there, but they no longer held power over her. She was free, finally. As Sophia stepped out into the cool night air, a sense of finality settled over her. The meeting with Ryan had been everything she expected, and nothing at the same time. His tearful regret, his excuses, they hadn't stirred the emotions she thought they might. Instead, they had confirmed what she already knew. She was no longer Brianna Stanton, no longer the woman who could be hurt by his betrayal. Ryan was part of a past that she had finally buried. But Jessica, that was a different matter entirely. Unlike Ryan, Jessica hadn't been torn apart by guilt. She had walked away from their friendship with barely a scratch, thinking she could have it all: her best friend's trust and her best friend's husband. There had been no tearful apologies, no self-reflection. Jessica had carried on with her life as if Brianna didn't matter. And that was something Sophia couldn't forgive. The confrontation with Jessica at the bar had been satisfying, but it hadn't been enough. Jessica was still out there, living her life, probably smug in the belief that she had escaped the consequences of her actions. But Sophia had no intention of letting her off that easily. Jessica had to be taught a lesson that went deeper than words, a lesson that would leave scars far more permanent than the ones she had inflicted on Brianna. Sophia had been planning this moment ever since she began her transformation. While the surgeries and weight loss had been the visible part of her rebirth, the real change had been in her mind. The woman she had become, the one who wore the name Sophia Vaughn, was a master strategist, and she had spent months preparing for Jessica's downfall. As she hailed a cab and directed the driver to her apartment, Sophia's thoughts were laser-focused on the plan ahead. She had been patient, waiting for the right moment, and now, with Ryan out of the way, it was time to execute the final phase. The next morning, Sophia sat in her sleek minimalist apartment, her laptop open in front of her. She sipped her coffee slowly, savoring the calm before the storm. Everything was in place. Over the past few weeks, she had gathered enough information on Jessica to know every detail of her life: the real estate business she ran, the clients she catered to, even the few skeletons she had hidden in her closet. It had been easy enough to track down the information, to follow Jessica's every move through social media and mutual acquaintances. Jessica had always been careless, arrogant enough to believe no one would ever come after her. But now, Sophia would dismantle her life piece by piece, just as Jessica had done to hers. First, Sophia contacted one of Jessica's most important clients, a high-profile real estate investor who had trusted Jessica with several lucrative deals. Sophia had posed as a potential buyer, someone interested in high-end properties, and had quickly gained his trust through carefully curated conversations and fake credentials. The investor had no idea he was about to walk into a carefully laid trap. With a few well-timed emails and a cleverly forged document, Sophia planted seeds of doubt in the investor's mind. She suggested that Jessica had been mishandling his investments, diverting funds into her personal accounts. The accusations were subtle, but they were enough to raise suspicion. It didn't take long before the investor began to pull back from their dealings, demanding explanations Jessica couldn't provide. The second phase of Sophia's plan was even more personal. Jessica had always prided herself on her public image. Her Instagram feed filled with photos of glamorous parties, high-end dinners, and designer outfits. To the outside world, she appeared flawless, a woman who had it all. But Sophia knew better. She knew about the affair Jessica had had long before Ryan with a married businessman whose wife had no idea about the betrayal. With the help of a private investigator she had hired months ago, Sophia gathered enough evidence to expose the affair. She had photos, text messages, even financial records of the hush money Jessica had received to keep the affair quiet. It was all sitting in a neat little folder on Sophia's laptop, ready to be unleashed. Sophia crafted a carefully worded email addressed to the businessman's wife. She didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself. Within hours, the fallout began. Jessica's phone must have exploded with calls and messages. The wife, furious and betrayed, had wasted no time in confronting her husband. Sophia could imagine the chaos that had unfolded. Jessica scrambling to contain the damage, the businessman trying to salvage his marriage. It was a delicious kind of justice, watching from a distance as Jessica's life began to unravel. But Sophia wasn't done yet. She saved the best for last. That evening, Sophia dressed in another sleek, figure-hugging dress and made her way to one of the most exclusive clubs in the city. It was a place Jessica frequented often, a hub for the social elite. Tonight, Sophia knew Jessica would be there, trying to smooth things over with her remaining clients and contacts, pretending that everything was fine. As Sophia entered the club, heads turned, just as they always did now. She was no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. People noticed her, admired her, and that power was intoxicating. She spotted Jessica across the room, talking animatedly to a group of people, her face a mask of confidence that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jessica was still beautiful, still commanding attention, but there was a tension in her posture that Sophia recognized immediately. She was losing control, and she knew it. Sophia made her way toward the group, her steps measured and deliberate. As she approached, Jessica's eyes landed on her, and for a moment there was a flicker of panic. It was brief, but it was enough. Jessica quickly composed herself, but Sophia could see the cracks. "Jessica," Sophia greeted her, her voice smooth and dripping with false warmth. "You look stressed." Jessica's smile was tight, forced. "Sophia, I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I've been around," Sophia replied, her eyes cold and sharp. "I've just been busy with a few things." Jessica's gaze darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. "I heard you've been doing well for yourself," she said, her voice strained. Sophia smiled. "I have, and I've heard things haven't been going so well for you lately. It must be hard, juggling so many complications." Jessica's eyes darkened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sophia leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, I think you do. The businessmen, the clients, it's all starting to slip through your fingers, isn't it?" Jessica's face went pale, the mask of confidence crumbling. You did this?" Sophia's smile widened, but it was cold and cruel. "I told you, Jessica, you've never faced real consequences, until now." Jessica's hands trembled, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Why are you doing this?" Sophia's gaze hardened. "Because you took everything from me, and now I'm taking everything from you." Jessica stared at her, her eyes wide with fear, with the realization that her perfect life was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Satisfied, Sophia turned and walked away, leaving Jessica standing in the middle of the crowded room, alone and broken. As Sophia stepped outside into the night, the cool air hitting her face, she felt a sense of completion. Jessica's life had been carefully dismantled, piece by piece, just as she had planned. The revenge was sweet, but it was also final. The chapter was closed. But as she walked down the street, Sophia realized something. The revenge she had so meticulously plotted hadn't filled the emptiness inside her. It hadn't healed the scars. It had simply left her with more questions, more hollow victories. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than revenge. As the cold night air wrapped around Sophia, the realization of what she had done settled heavily on her shoulders. She had spent so much time, so much effort, planning every intricate detail of Jessica's downfall. And now it was over. Jessica was ruined, Ryan was a distant memory, and the people who had wronged her were finally paying the price. But as Sophia walked away from the club, the satisfaction she had anticipated didn't come. Instead, there was an unsettling emptiness. The world around her felt eerily quiet, the bustling city sounds muffled by the weight of her thoughts. What was supposed to be her moment of triumph now felt like a hollow victory. She had achieved everything she set out to do, and yet, it hadn't brought her the peace she had hoped for. Sophia walked aimlessly through the streets, her heels clicking against the pavement as she replayed the events of the past few months in her mind. The surgeries, the reinvention, the carefully orchestrated revenge, it had all been leading to this moment. But standing on the other side of it, Sophia realized she was still the same person inside. No matter how much she had changed on the outside, the wounds that had driven her to seek revenge were still there, festering beneath the surface. She stopped in front of a large glass window, her reflection staring back at her. The woman in the reflection was everything she had wanted to be. Strong, beautiful, untouchable. But behind the flawless exterior, Sophia saw the cracks. The eyes looking back at her were filled with a familiar sadness, the kind she thought she had left behind with Brianna Stanton. Her phone buzzed in her purse, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from Dr. Michael Reynolds, the plastic surgeon who had been with her through every step of her transformation. "How are you feeling? Let's schedule a follow-up soon." Sophia stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. Dr. Reynolds had been instrumental in her transformation, but even he couldn't change the one thing she had been avoiding all along: her heart. For all the surgeries, the physical changes, the weight loss, the new identity, she was still carrying the scars of betrayal deep within her. "I'm fine," she typed back, though the words felt like a lie. But was she really fine? She had spent so much time focused on destroying Ryan and Jessica that she had never stopped to ask herself what she truly wanted. Revenge had been her sole motivation for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. Sophia slipped her phone back into her purse and continued walking, her mind spinning with questions she had been too afraid to confront. What now? What was she supposed to do now that her plan had come to fruition? There was no one left to fight, no one left to bring down. She had won the battle, but she had lost herself in the process. The loneliness she had tried so hard to ignore crept in, filling the void that revenge had left behind. It was a bitter truth to swallow, that no amount of vengeance, no matter how meticulously executed, could truly heal the wounds of the heart. Sophia found herself walking toward a small park, a place she used to visit when she needed to think, back when she was still Brianna. The familiarity of it tugged at something deep inside her, a reminder of who she had been before her life had fallen apart. She sat on a bench, the cool metal pressing against her skin as she looked up at the stars. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything. The betrayal, the pain, the anger. It was all still there, but now it was mixed with something else: regret. Not for seeking revenge, but for losing herself in the process. As she sat in the quiet darkness, a thought came to her that she had been avoiding for so long. What would her life have been like if she had chosen a different path? If, instead of seeking revenge, she had sought healing? What if she had let go of Ryan and Jessica's betrayal and focused on building a life for herself, one that wasn't defined by the people who had hurt her? The idea felt foreign, almost impossible. Letting go had never been an option for her. But now, as the adrenaline of revenge began to fade, Sophia wondered if it was the only way forward. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who it was from, but the timing couldn't have been worse. She stared at the screen, debating whether to reply, but something inside her told her not to. She had spent too much time chasing after conversations, after closure, after explanations. She didn't need another confrontation. Not tonight. Instead, Sophia turned off her phone and slipped it into her purse. The world could wait. For the first time in a long time, she needed to be alone with her thoughts to figure out what came next. As she sat there, the stars twinkling above her, Sophia realized that she had a choice to make. She could continue down this path of destruction, or she could finally let go. She could rebuild, not as the woman seeking revenge, but as someone who was ready to move forward, to heal, to live a life that wasn't defined by the pain of the past. Sophia took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, just a small flicker in the darkness, but it was there. The price of vengeance had been high. She had lost so much along the way. Her innocence, her sense of self, her ability to trust. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim what was left. Sophia stood up from the bench, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what the future would hold. But she knew one thing for certain: she was done with revenge. From now on, she would live for herself. The end.